You pray, you ask, you insist, but nothing changes. The days go by and the circumstances remain the same. The same difficulties stay in front of you. The same problems return as if they had never left. And the silence, it's still there. At first, you brush it off. You tell yourself it's just a phase. That God is preparing something. That the answer will come at the right time. But as time passes and nothing happens, something begins to move inside you. A silent doubt. Almost imperceptible. But dangerous. Is God even hearing me? You don't say it out loud. You don't tell anyone. But you think it. And thinking it already hurts enough. Because you see other people testifying about quick answers. People saying they prayed and immediately felt peace. Others sharing stories of miracles, open doors, sudden changes. And when you compare that to your reality, it feels like there's a difference. You speak, but it seems like no one responds. You ask for direction, but you receive no sign. You seek comfort, but you find silence. And then the most uncomfortable thought of all appears. Am I doing something wrong? Maybe I'm not praying the right way. Maybe my faith isn't strong enough. Maybe I'm not worthy of the answer. And without realizing it, frustration begins to mix with guilt. Most people, when facing silence, question God. They question His timing. They question His plans. They question His justice. But almost no one stops to examine their own posture in prayer. Not in the sense of blame, but of maturity. Because often our prayers are made more as demands than as surrender. More like request lists than relationship. We want quick answers, clear solutions, visible signs. But we rarely ask whether we're willing to hear something different from what we want. Sometimes it's not heaven that is closed. Sometimes it's our heart that is closed to a type of answer that doesn't fit our expectations. We pray expecting immediate external change. But God may be working on something internal first. We pray asking for the situation to change. But perhaps He is shaping you before moving the circumstances. Silence frustrates us because it removes control. It puts us in a place where we cannot speed up the process or manipulate the outcome. We can only trust. And trusting without visible signs is uncomfortable. But maybe the problem isn't the absence of an answer. Maybe it's the expectation that God will respond exactly the way you imagined. Not every prayer that goes up is being made the right way. There is a silent mistake that almost everyone makes and rarely notices. Most people turn prayer into a list of requests. God, give me this. God, fix that. God, remove this from my life. God, open this door. God, close that one. Without realizing it, prayer stops being relationship and becomes petition. A constant flow of demands. A space where you talk, but almost never stop to listen. Deep down, an almost automatic logic is formed. I pray, the Lord fixes it. An invisible contract. I do my spiritual part, pray every day, I try to do the right thing, so God needs to do His part. But prayer is not a transaction, it's not an exchange, it's not bargaining. Prayer is not a button you press to generate an immediate response. Prayer is alignment. When you pray only seeking external change but do not allow internal change, something becomes misaligned. You want the situation to change, but you don't want your posture to change. You want the scenery to transform, but you resist any transformation within you. And that is exactly where frustration is born. Because God is not an automatic response mechanism. He does not react to emotional pressure. He does not answer because you insisted enough. He does not move because you repeated the same phrase dozens of times. He responds according to purpose, according to process, according to maturity. And many times, the silence that bothers you is not absence. It is waiting. Waiting for you to grow. Waiting for you to understand. Waiting for you to be prepared to sustain what you are asking for. Imagine receiving something too big for your current structure. A blessing without character. An open door without preparation. Many times, what you call delay is protection. But this requires a deep shift in the way you seek. Because as long as prayer is merely an attempt to control outcomes, it will continue to generate frustration. When you pray only for God to do what you want, you turn faith into a tool of convenience. But true faith is not about convincing God, it is about allowing Him to shape you. Maybe the answer you expect will not come while you are seeking only a solution instead of transformation. Maybe heaven is not closed. Maybe it is waiting for something inside you to adjust first. Maybe God is not silent. Maybe He is waiting for you to change the way you seek. Some people pray trying to convince God. They explain every detail. They justify their requests. They present arguments. They make promises. If you do this, I will change. If you answer me, I will be more faithful. If you open this door, I will never complain again. Without realizing it, prayer becomes an attempt at negotiation. As if God needed to be persuaded. As if He didn't know what was happening. As if it were necessary to build a convincing speech to touch His heart. But prayer is not negotiation. It is not spiritual performance. It is not automatic repetition of ready-made phrases. It is not a well-rehearsed, beautiful speech. It is relationship. And relationship is not built with arguments. It is built with presence. When you love someone, you don't need to convince them to listen to you. You share. You open your heart. You speak the truth, even when it is messy, when it is ugly, when it reveals weakness. The problem is that many people learn to pray as if presenting a report. They organize words, try to impress, use religious terms, maintain a formal posture. But God is not looking for eloquence. He is looking for sincerity. Relationship requires surrender. It requires vulnerability. It requires acknowledging limits. It requires saying, I don't know, I am afraid, I am frustrated. And it requires listening. This is the point almost no one develops. Many people pray, but never stop to listen. They pray in a rush because they have commitments. They pray distracted with their phone nearby. They pray thinking about the next task of the day. They pray while their mind is racing. They speak for 5 minutes and run off. They vent, ask, give thanks, and finish. There is no silence, no pause, no space for reflection, no time to notice what is being adjusted inside. Then, when they don't see immediate change, they conclude, God didn't answer. But how can you hear an answer if you never stayed long enough to listen? Sometimes the answer does not come as an audible voice or a spectacular sign. It comes as an adjustment in perspective, as a quiet conviction, as a change of direction that begins subtly within you. But that requires slowing down. It requires silencing your own anxiety. It requires accepting that prayer is not only speaking, it is remaining. Maybe you are expecting a grand external answer while God is working internally, in a silent and progressive way. Maybe what you call absence is simply lack of attention to what is already happening. Maybe you are not being ignored. Maybe you have never stopped to listen. The prayer that truly transforms does not begin with a request. It begins with surrender. Most of us learn to pray starting with need. God, do this. God, fix that. God, change this situation. But the prayer that matures faith begins differently. It begins when you stop trying to control the outcome and decide to trust the process. Before asking God to change your situation, perhaps the most honest question is, what do you want to change in me? That question requires courage, because it is far more comfortable to ask for external change than to allow internal transformation. It is easier to point to the problem than to recognize areas that need adjustment within your own heart. Before demanding a clear answer, offer silence. Silence not as resignation, but as posture. As someone who says, I don't just want to speak. I want to listen. I don't just want to present my version. I want to understand yours. This kind of prayer slows the soul. It removes you from the position of demanding and places you in the position of trusting. Before complaining about the delay, ask yourself, am I ready for the answer I am asking for? Because sometimes we ask for open doors, but we are not prepared for the responsibility that comes with them. We ask for growth, but resist the process that builds maturity. We ask for change, but do not want to leave the comfort zone that prevents us from evolving. When prayer stops being control and becomes trust, something deep begins to happen. You stop measuring God by time. You stop evaluating faith only by visible results. You stop turning every silence into frustration. Trust does not mean you stop asking for things. It means that when you ask, you surrender. That when you speak, you trust. That when you wait, you rest. Maybe heaven was never closed. Maybe you were speaking, but not surrendering. Maybe you were asking for direction, but had already decided the path. Maybe you were asking for God's will, but expecting it to match yours exactly. Surrender is not weakness. It is spiritual maturity. It is recognizing that God sees what you do not see, that He understands timing you do not understand, that He knows what you still do not know. If this message is opening your eyes, subscribe to the channel now. Here we talk about faith in a deep, practical, and real way. No magic formulas, but real transformation. The right prayer does not change God, it changes you. And when you change, the way you wait changes. The way you trust changes. The way you see silence changes. And often, it is in this new posture that you finally realize, God was always listening. There is a truth almost no one told you about prayer, and maybe this is exactly what has been missing for you to understand what you are living through. You are not praying wrong because you ask too much. You are praying wrong when you seek God only for what He can do. There is a huge difference between seeking God's hand and seeking God's heart. When prayer is reduced to what you want to receive, it stops being relationship and becomes utility. God starts being seen as a solution, not as presence. As an answer, not as the way. Prayer is not a tool, it is connection. Tools are used. Connections are cultivated. When you turn prayer into a tool, you only draw near when you need something. You only pray intensely when you are in crisis. You only seek deeply when the pain tightens. And when the situation improves, the intensity decreases. But true connection remains even when there is no emergency. If you are frustrated, that does not mean God has rejected you. Frustration is not proof of abandonment. Many times, it is a sign that your expectations need to mature. It may mean that God is leading you to a deeper level of relationship, a level where you do not depend only on quick answers to keep trusting. Mature faith is not born from immediate responses, it is born from consistency. It is born when you continue praying even without seeing change. When you continue trusting even without understanding. When you continue seeking, not because you received something, but because you recognize who God is. Quick answers may excite you for a moment, but they do not build depth. What builds depth is remaining. It is continuing to draw near even when heaven seems silent. Maybe the silence you fear is actually an invitation. An invitation to leave the surface, an invitation to make prayer less rushed, an invitation to stop negotiating and start surrendering. Because while you are seeking only solutions, you may miss the opportunity to develop intimacy. And intimacy is built over time, in consistency, in sincerity. God was never far away. If there is distance, it is not geographical. It is relational. And relationship adjusts with posture, with intention, with real surrender. Maybe you just need to learn to seek Him the right way. Not with more words, but with more truth. Not with more promises, but with more willingness to listen. Not with more demands, but with more trust. In the end, it is not about emotional intensity. It is not about repeating phrases more forcefully. It is not about convincing God of anything. It is about depth. It is not about speaking louder. It is about surrendering deeper.